Howdy, and welcome to Curious Blend. I am your host, Keller Davis, the owner of CreateScape Coworking here in Austin, Texas. This is a show where we explore the intersections of creativity, business, leadership, and philosophy. In each episode, we dive deep with inspiring guests who share their own unique stories and perspectives. I'm here to learn and stay curious. Today, I will be speaking with a current member at CreateScape, Michelle Ates, who is the executive director of nonprofit TWA Cares and TWA College. Michelle brings over 15 years of experience in sales, account management, customer service, and technical support, and she is also recognized for her dedication to building meaningful relationships and enhancing organizational efficiency. Under her leadership, TWA Cares and TWA College have been pivotal in supporting student athletes as they transition to college life, helping them to balance their academic and athletic pursuits. Michelle is a passionate advocate for education and personal development, and her work truly reflects a commitment to helping others achieve their full potential. Michelle, welcome to Curious Blend. Thanks you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
How's your day going?
It's going good.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Got your coffee in and everything. So.
Coffee, little mint.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
First, tell me more about TWA Cares and TWA College. I know a little bit, but what inspired the creation of these organizations and what unique challenges do they address?
Yeah. So what inspired it was just basically looking back at like when I was young and just, a lot of people are like, okay, well, I just lived a regular life. For me, it was regular. But then as I got older, I realized, okay, Michelle, you're a little privileged, spoiled brat. And so I just started noticing like how my childhood was like way different than some people, and I just took it for granted. But then like, I had a kid. I was like, okay, oh, there's roadblock. Oh, then, her friends would have roadblocks. And it didn't matter, what your race is and all those other types of things. You're living a life and there's going to be roadblocks when you hit roadblocks. But I noticed that like for kids, it's like hard for them sometimes to kind of like navigate the roadblocks or just be able to speak to how some roadblocks really are part of their identity. And so that's how we kind of came up with this, which was, we started off with this ragtag group of martial artists where the kids were great martial artists. They were great students, and they just weren't getting the same recognition as other folks, in spite of like them doing like little tweaks, and things like that to kind of like, kind of brush up, their, how they, present themselves and things like that. And so as we went along, we just started rolling in other sports. So like we added in basketball, and now we've grown to football. And with that, it was where we really started noticing that college athletics had changed. But what happened was the kids in high school were left behind in the thought process to that, to where it's like these kids for like 13 years, it's a difference between them sport-wise and the martial artists sport-wise for us. We've noticed like the martial artists, they're more apt to like when they get to high school say, hey, either I'm going to transition into maybe acting or a different type of sport, martial arts, or I'm just a full-time student. And this is what my passion is. But this helped me kind of get through high school and things like that. The kids that are in our more traditional sports, right? They're more told, and I don't think it's so much at home, so much as the pressure comes at school, especially once they hit junior high, that this is ingrained in their identity, and that's where we kind of come up with that jock and jockette, term, and it's like, that's what you're going to do. You're going to become a pro. You're going to play in college, this, that, and the other. And they really believe that. But what happens is in the selection process, a slew of them get left behind. But they sat there and for 13 years, they did everything right.
Yeah.
They got the good grades. Some of them are valedictorians and salutatorians, They did everything right on the field. Never got in a lick of trouble on the field, but, they went to all the right camps and things like that, but they still didn't get selected, right? And for kids, that's a gut punch.
Yeah. It feels so unfair.
Yeah, right? It feels real unfair, especially if you see somebody and you're like, I know they took shortcuts,
Sure.
but now you're over there. And what about me? And so, looking at that, we were like, okay, that's another roadblock we have to kind of figure out. How do we, as adults, set things up such that we break up the roadblock, tear up the boulder in the road, and as we tear up this boulder that's in the road, put the power back in the students' hands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we came up with TWA College, which is just letting them really take things back by saying, you go to college, I play a sport. So I'm still a student athlete. And with that, we just basically give them all the wraparound resources they need in exchange for them getting good grades in college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like you're doing a lot of really important work for these kids.
Thanks.
What made it feel like you had that privilege when you were younger? Was it just like a really supportive family?
Mm-hmm. It was like a supportive family. It's like economic resources. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks about, fads and trends, when you're young. But it was like when I was older, then I really kind of like saw like, it was like Izod's and polos, right? When I was little. Mm-hmm. Izod's, polos, Guess, and Jabot jeans. And you would count like how many you had, right?
Yeah.
And, I had everybody else, they had like a couple of shirts and a couple pairs of pants, but like us, we had like Izod or polo for every day in the week, then we got the jeans to match, Izod socks, Izod. My mom just went buku crazy, right? But then there were just those other little things, right? Which were like, I remember we had a housekeeper, some people get mad at me saying, I don't know how else to say it, but most Black families back then didn't have a maid, but we had a housekeeper,
mm-hmm.
And she didn't do anything crazy. It's not like she wore a uniform or anything like that, but she came mm-hmm. at least once or twice a week and she'd help mom, with cleaning the house, giving little spot touches and things like that, in the house. But, things like that. And we just never had to want for anything, And so it was kind of like when I got older, then, life hits, and you just kind of see and you get to talking, with people that you're around and, just realize, okay, whoa, our parents, really did provide this great, bubble of a life for us, So, yeah, it was like they kind of set the bar super duper high, on, like what they did for us, which I'm totally thankful for because it like makes it to where like, there's not too many places I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Versus some of my peers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it puts you in a position now where you're giving back to other people. So it's really beautiful. I was looking at the TWA website as well, and I was trying to understand, like, I guess the term redshirting. Mm-hmm. Like it says like TWA College offers an alternative to redshirting at a traditional college. Could you like explain what redshirting typically involves as someone who doesn't know anything about that?
Yeah, so that's like when a student goes to college and they're playing a sport, and that first year that they're there, the NCAA and other athletic associations have this thing they call an eligibility clock.
Okay.
And so basically it's like the time in which you can participate in college sports. And so when they say that you're a red shirt, it means that for that particular year, you and your coaches have decided that you're not going to officially be on the team.
Okay.
And so with not officially being on the team, it's like you're more focused on school. Mm-hmm. And when you're focused on school, you're also, depending upon where you're at. Some places you don't even practice with the team. Maybe you just do, physical workouts. So like lifting and, conditioning with the team. Some places they actually let them, do strength and conditioning along with practicing with the team. They just don't get to play in the games. And, it works good for some kids it doesn't, versus here, we don't have a red shirt system. So what we do instead is we say, okay, we're going to find a way to make this work to where you're still going to, feel like you're a part of the team and we're going to, put in the resources to build you up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does like GPA play into that? It sounds like GPA is like a factor in, with admissions processes, but can you talk about how TWA College like supports students in improving their GPA and their and then preparing them academically for those next steps?
Yeah. So we have this thing, I like to call it ultimate freedom. So you have the ultimate freedom to play, provided your GPA is where it should be.
Yeah.
Right. But in terms of getting it to that 2.8, what we do is we take every student where they come to us at. So that means if, say, for instance, you come in and you're taking a math class, an English class, old school social studies, and science class, right? And in math and science, you're a typical A student, right? But in English and social studies, you're a C student.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we do is we say, okay, in that math and science class where you get an A, we're looking for you to stay somewhere about that A. And then that English and social studies class where you typically are getting a C, then we're looking at that as, okay, that's your starting point. We're not saying, hey, you come in the door and we're expecting you to get an A or a B in English and social studies. You never did. So why would we put that expectation on you from jump? That's not fair. Instead, what we do is we provide the wraparound resources, which means we start off from square one, what we call pod time. And with pod time, what we do is we tutor you. We give you a one-on-one tutor. We also, on a weekly basis, check in with you just to kind of see how things are going with your classes. And then also what we do is we help you take a look inside to see how do you set yourself up for success daily, weekly, monthly, so we can keep this thing going and rocking and rolling.
Where did the concept originally come from for this?
The concept came up from two places. So one, the concept for the transformational process piece where we take a look inside, that came from a book that I wrote called Transformational Process Planning. And then the concept in and of itself for the college portion of things and how it works came from my partner, Patrick Wright.
Yeah.
He, former athlete himself, went to college, he didn't have the same support system I did. And so though he went to college and it was a real good college, he wound up coming back because his people didn't know how to handle the paperwork. So he wound up coming back from college early and, so that kind of messed up his college career a little bit, and then he had a chance to go pro. But, versus me, it was a little different system. And so we kind of got to looking, and as he wrote this thing, he was thinking about originally almost like a trade school thing because he was seeing kids go into college sports or going into the pros, and it just didn't seem like they had people that were always around to kind of lead them through those intangible soft skills. Mm-hmm. And as he got to plotting and planning that, and just seeing how college athletics was changing. He was like, I need to use a curriculum. And then he remembered that I had the transformational process plan. And he was like, looking at it, he was like, can we use this?
Of course you can.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. And that's how we came up with the college side because we were already using it with adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that book written for a more narrow purpose at the time, or was it for kind of broadly kind of applying it towards?
It was broad.
Yeah.
It was broad. It was it started off with just kind of like a niche from the martial arts kids. And then after that, I kind of tweaked it a little bit when I was working with some of the formerly homeless kids. And then in between, then there were some adults that came through. And yeah, so it got a whole bunch of different little tweaks and all of that good jazz. But yeah, it all came from basically just life skills development, and then also things that I saw as I was looking at life skills development for folks. I came across recovery stuff and how they work with, some people when they're recovering, from addictions or just whatever people are suffering with. And they actually develop these plans that kind of, help you see where are your allies in life. Yeah.
I want to also talk about your background, because you have a really impressive background in sales,
Thanks.
Customer relations, and technical support. How do you think those experiences have shaped the approach to leading a nonprofit organization like TWA Cares in college?
Yeah, they shaped them a lot, a lot. It's like, it puts that compassion there. It totally puts there, the discipline to just kind of like order things and kind of like figure, okay, what's the process here? Are we documenting the process? Those types of things. But the biggest thing is just being able to just sit silent, listen, and then figure out your language versus the other person's language and being able to decipher the two. Yeah, and always assuming the best in the situation.
TWA College also focuses on the holistic development of student athletes, balancing like academics and athletics. How do you ensure that both these aspects are given the right equal priority, and what support systems are in place to help students excel in both of those areas?
Yeah, it's hard because kids, they'd rather just focus on the sports.
Sure.
They're like, school, sports, that's it. What do you mean I need other stuff? There's nothing wrong with me. But that's where we pull those times out. So like we pull out dream clock time, which is where we make the kids all sit down in discussion, and sometimes we'll bring folks in from the community, to sit down and just discuss. It's this book this guy named Clarence Hill in Oklahoma wrote, and it takes folks around 12 hours on the clock, and each hour on the clock is a different discussion. And it centers around diversity as, the topic. But as you get to talking, you really, the farther along you go on the clock, you find, okay, were we really talking about diversity? We're just having a regular chit chat now, Yeah. And so, we do that along with, and that helps with folks starting to look inside.
Right.
And then we use, like I said, my book that I wrote, that's a curriculum piece that they sit down and they have this thing called pod time. So where most schools, you'll have study hall, we have pod time. And that 3-hour window that they're required to come to every week, what we do is we break it up to where a portion of that time, you're studying, but then a portion of that time, we carve it out so that you can deal with you. And, the very first thing that happens when dealing with you is we're checking in on where you're at. So, and we're always constantly checking in. So like even with practice, the coaches are keyed in to check in with the kids as they come in, just to find out how are they doing. You know what I'm saying? So like if a kid comes and he's like, I'm doing good, but I didn't eat. Okay, go eat.
Yeah.
What do you mean go eat? Go to the corner, get a snack, come back. Well, I don't have the money. Here, go. That type of a thing. Because we found that, if a person is not right, then how are you going to expect these other pieces?
Yeah, you have to take care of yourself first.
Yeah. So, that's kind of like how we work here. Shoes, you need shoes. Let's go. I got some shoes at Family Dollar for $3.
Yeah.
They're even kind of cute. Let's go grab some. Yeah.
What have been the biggest challenges, and how have you navigated them?
The biggest challenge, I would say, is, it's always going to be financial. Mm-hmm. And that's just because the guys are older. Mm-hmm. So our population that we deal with is 17 to 22.
Okay.
And so most of the times when you're in the process of looking for grants, that's the forgotten age group. It's kind of like, and then when they figure, okay, well, I love this part, but they're gonna be athletes too. It's like, well, shouldn't the college pay for that? Well, ACC doesn't have a team. Houston-Tillotson doesn't have a team. St. Edward's doesn't have a team.
Yeah.
Concordia, they don't have a football team. UT has a football team, but how many kids from Austin play football for UT?
Yeah.
Not many.
Right.
And so it's like, they're that group that's kind of like, you figure they're solid, but they're not. So what we do is we scrounge and scramble however we got to. So like Pat, he hops on this electric cab with all these lights on it.
I want to see this now.
I think he drove it here one time. That makes him drives it one time. And he drives that sapsucker around downtown and just collects donations. Takes people from Rainy Street down to 6th Street or wherever they want to go, just like a regular cab. Mm-hmm. But all his money goes towards the kids.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then I hop on the ambulance couple times a week,
Mhm.
and bandage you up and all that other good stuff, and then come on back, and that gets tossed over into the TWA pile.
So you're taking care of people in different ways every day of the week. Is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Your role involves a lot of strategy as well as hands-on engagement. What's the most fulfilling part of all of that for you?
The most fulfilling part is just that, helping people.
Yeah.
That's the thing, helping people. My thing is, I do what I've been led to do, and what they do with it is their choice. I'm not here to decide how somebody digests the help that I give them.
Mm-hmm.
My blessing is being able to help. Their blessing is what they're going to get out of it, but I can't dictate the time in which that comes. So that's my biggest joy, is just being able to be in this position in life where I can help others.
Yeah. Have you always been like that? Like where does your drive for helping others come from, you think?
I don't know. I don't know. My mom helped a lot of people, but at the same time, she's probably a little bit more shrewd than she's not as free loving as me. She kind of she could kind of get that line and be like, cut them off. That's enough. My grandma, she's kind of like the same way. So I probably get it from like one of my aunts or something like that, but both my parents would probably say, if anybody's going to bring a stray dog home, it's Michelle. If anybody's going to bring the kid that nobody knows home and says, well, he needs a place to sleep. Let him sleep on the floor, be gone in the morning. That's Michelle, And, it's just kind of like, I don't know. That's just how I'm wired.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Just that weird wire.
The good kind of weird.
Yeah.
TWA Cares also emphasizes like transformational process planning. I guess that's like the book that you're talking about. Yeah. Can you share like a success story where this approach has significantly impacted a student athlete's life? Like assuming you're able to talk about a particular person.
Yeah. So like we've got one young guy, and we were working with him, and he hadn't played, I think, since 8th grade, right? But he was like, just please take a chance on me. I know I need this to get myself back in school. And I'm like, ooh, I was like, yeah, okay, we got you. So we're going to make a way to make this work. And so, we're talking about a kid that, one, he hasn't played organized sports since 8th grade. He's just kind of dabbled in 7-on-7 football. So it's kind of like football, but it's flag football, 7-on-7. And along with that, he was in high school, graduated, and he said it himself. He's like, I graduated by the hair of my chin, like 2.0, and boom, he was just there and out the door, And so it's like the thought of a 2.8, he's like, I don't know. You're talking about a 2.8. You know who you're talking to? And I'm like, well, we're going to make this work, And so it's just kind of like not letting him slide, but just taking him where he was, what I'm saying? I mean, he was this hard wire, and just a wild hair, but as we, saw him, come into the fold and, trying to just love him where he's at, it meant, okay, he can't sit still for longer than 10 minutes, Are we going to boot him out of every meeting because he can't sit still for 10 minutes? No, we're going to work this out. And when you got to head out, then this is the signal, and this is the expectation for when to come back. And okay, now we're a month in, I need you to be able to sit for 15 minutes, 20, so we kind of get to that particular point, right? But with the process work, we also sit them down and kind of like work through that, to where, it's, we're able to find, okay, like what pieces are not coming in play during the course of the day, you don't have ADD and these other things, and you went to the doctor, get checked, you don't have those things. It's just nobody's ever had that expectation. So it's like, okay, now we kind of get these things rocking and rolling, and, we just take it breadcrumb by breadcrumb, daily, monthly, weekly success. And along with that, then that's where, like I said, we take those things that we call hiccups. You're supposed to be able to sit for 15 minutes. You only sat for 10. We're not going to spank you on the hand, but let's sit down and let's break this down. What was going through your mind to where you just had to leave at 10 minutes? Why couldn't you sit those extra 5? And then breaking that down with what his values are. Well, what value was triggered? Well, during the course of the conversation, it was like a team meeting, and the team meeting got a little heated. And so what got crossed for him was perception. He felt as if his perception wasn't being heard. That's a big thing for him. So rather than be disruptive, he went out and got himself in check.
Yeah.
Which is actually a good thing. But if we didn't have that process in place, we never would have found that out. And then from there, now that we've found it out, then coming up with a plan on how we can all, work together to make sure that, he is heard more fully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like a really a compassionate way to hold people accountable, but also support them.
Yeah. And then we do the same thing for class. It's like when they're in class, we, check in with them, in the campuses, stroll up, have a little backpack, put some chargers, pens and stuff like that in there, and anybody on campus can jump in there and get what they need. But, checking in with them and just making sure, okay, he's in class today, and, just all those little things there, even if it means just sitting there while he does his homework, Yeah. It's almost like raising kids. Yeah. Only difference is you put it on paper. And as you put it on paper, we even mark down those people that are not good to bring in if they have a hiccup.
I see.
And then supporting them such that those folks aren't in that process as they come through the hiccup. So that way they can truly get to where they need to go. Yeah.
So I was originally thinking it was just football, but you mentioned that it was a number of different sports. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So football is the main sport that we have active right now.
Yeah.
Martial arts, it kind of just drives its own self, little bird self. We pretty much don't have to do any work with that. We just kind of send sponsorship out, martial arts. And then the basketball, we put it on hold for a sec while we ramp up football, because football is...
Yeah, it's a whole beast of its own, especially in Texas.
Yes. It's not, basketball feels easier compared to football. I feel like I can buy 12 uniforms and, get a couple of basketballs and
I love basketball.
Yeah, right? Versus football, you got helmets and shoulder pads and, pants with pads, without pads. It's ooh, I didn't know.
From your perspective, how has the landscape of supporting student athletes changed over the years, especially regarding mental health and personal development?
Mm-hmm. I think it's changed a lot in terms of, I think people are starting to recognize the fact that these young people are truly people, and yes, they play a sport, but they're playing a sport doesn't mean that they don't have feelings. It doesn't mean that they don't have goals or dreams outside of that sport, but that sport for them is more community. And, that if they're going to change the landscape of sports, they have to recognize the fact that they have a community and that they have a voice and that they're going to speak up now. They're not going to just be kind of like little robots, and just kind of yes, sir, no, sir. And, in the background, you're really not feeling whatever coach is saying. Yeah. So I think now they're going to start recognizing them more, but it's just kind of how, because they're paying college students now versus before they didn't pay them. So it's okay, so are we still amateurs here? Or are we, pros? How's that going to work? And how's it going to work for the kids that don't get paid? Mm-hmm. So yeah. It's changing a lot.
But hopefully for the better.
I think for the better. I think it's going to have to change in some ways for the better, because the students are not the same as they used to be. This group of students, people talk about people wearing their heart on their sleeve and it being almost like a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
These kids wear their heart on their sleeves and it's a good thing, because it's they have their heart on their sleeve because they want you to know they got a heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I like that about them.
Especially when you're in that developmental age, I feel like you think that you have to close yourself off a little bit, or not be vulnerable, and it's so it's kind of a beautiful thing to, they can be learning that they can be people too, and like the things that they care about do matter, and it's not just fights against the cynicism of the world, I guess.
Yeah.
With your experience in account management and technical service, are there any like unique or innovative practices you've brought to TWA Cares that have made a difference as well?
I'd say probably more of I'm a numbers girl.
Okay.
So kind of like, you don't just
like
do
data.
Data. Yeah. I'm all about, making sure we have actionable data, what are the kids' metrics, those types of things like that. So that way we kind of can learn 1 year from the next, because our program is very similar to a college program, but it's so freaking different. And it's different than any other program I've seen that kind of like calls itself bridging a gap. So it's like we don't have any data to go by. So that's totally helped, from just being able to develop in-house tools that we can use, whether it be something out on the field to just kind of track stats, to being able to, actually create something in-house, just that we know like when kids are coming, when kids aren't coming, replanning stuff and all that other good stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, data can make such a big difference in terms of like how you keep moving forward. You seem like someone who does really value growth. What's one personal or professional goal that you have for the future?
Ooh, goal for the future. Probably, I haven't really thought about it. I mean, I know like one thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go and like probably like do some CCT EMS stuff. But also what I want to do is create in TWA Cares our own, what they call them in the high school cadets, right? For EMS. So that's one goal I have, is I want to create our own cadets group that's not tied to sports. So if they play sports, that's on them, but kind of like have our own little cadets group. Because I think that's a group that's changing as well. That needs to, like have their own, community as well. So they can kind of like link and really, be some powerful folks out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I relate so much to your sense of like community building, just because I've always tried to be in positions where I can empower people to be the best they can be, and look for ways I can like give them the resources so that they can like grow on their own. And so it's it's really cool to see you doing that.
Thank you.
Work as well. What's something about TWA Cares that people might not know, but you think is really important for them to understand?
I think probably two of the biggest things are, one is that we do the football and sports is great, but we also we work with the formerly homeless. So it's like it could be something so simple as just meals, or just kind of like, as we call it, friends and family. Somebody that says no judgment, and just kind of walk alongside them, as a buddy. Even if it's just you just moved in your house and now you're trying to get used to doing laundry every week. Okay, well, buddy up and go do some laundry. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that's one thing people don't recognize or realize. They hear formerly homeless. I think they think of like those big organizations that are, a lot more robust. But we figure they're already specializing in that. And that's great. But there's those little itty pieces and little breadcrumbs that, we feel that our folks coming off of the street, can sometimes use. And we feel like we're great listeners. So we try to listen to them and kind of, provide that, but, use that curriculum to kind of like give some accountability to what they do. And then the other thing is that even though the T, the W, and the A always talk about transformation with some type of actionable item.
Oh, that's what it stands for.
Yeah, so
right?
transformation with action, and then there's transformation with athletics when we're dealing with sports stuff.
Yeah.
It also stands for my dad's initials.
Oh, okay.
Thomas Webster Ates.
Got it.
And so it's our way to kind of like give back to him, because, you know, he was kind of like the one that's kind of like, okay, you got an idea? Okay, you're doing that? Oh, that's great. That's great. You know what I'm saying? You know, he was always one to like check in, you know, just kind of see like, what are you doing? That type of a thing. You know, he was supportive in that type of way, you know, but he also always had that ear. And for Austin, in particular, like this side of Austin, we used to have Anderson High School, not too far from here. And he went to Anderson, but he got handpicked to go from Anderson to Austin High when they desegregated the schools. And so that's another reason why we renamed it TWA after he passed, was kind of to pay homage to that, you know, because it's like, we look at, I don't think he really saw how powerful that move was. For him, it was just kind of like, I got selected. You know what I'm saying? And that was his thing. Because he was smart. And so he was like, you know, he loved the fact that he was smart. And I love the fact that I was smart too. I'm not a dummy, but you know, he was super smart. And so that was his thing, you know. But for us, we look at that and we're like, okay, you don't know that you knocked the freaking boulder down, dude, you know, and you're just so humble about it, you know. And it's like, you know, but that's what we're doing here, is we're knocking down boulders, you know. But as we do it, we want to make sure that we're humble just like him, you know. It's not about us winning anything. It's about the people that we serve winning. Yeah. What
a beautiful way to honor his legacy.
Thanks.
What are some of your favorite things that you do outside of work as well? Like, do you have any, like what are some of your hobbies or interests that might surprise someone?
Pretty much, let's see. Most of my friends would be like, she likes to lift weights, which I do.
Yeah.
I've been kind of slacking lately, but
I'm just starting to get into it.
Oh, so, I love lifting. I love lifting.
It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Lifting weights. I used to be in martial arts. I still do it at home, but I don't compete anymore. And then CrossFit.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. CrossFit. Yeah. Yeah. I don't do kip up pull-ups though. Kip up pull-ups. So you ever seen a CrossFit competition?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so when you watch it and like they're doing pull-ups, like normal pull-up, you're just going, yeah. Well, they go and it's like they're it's like they're just rowing on the pull-up. Yeah, it's like called a kipping pull-up.
Interesting.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of, you know, nice flexibility, and you know, you got to have some good rotator cuffs.
Is there an advantage to it, or is it just theatrical pull-ups?
There is some advantage to it, you know, but it kind of halfway feels like, I don't know, to me, I'm like looking, I'm like, show off, you know. But yeah, no, it's some advantage to it. It's almost like a gymnastic move along with a functional fitness move.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to look this up on YouTube afterwards because I'm very curious now. If you could give one piece of advice to like a young student athlete out there just starting on their journey, what would that be?
My thing would be to, like I tell everybody, you know, enjoy every ounce of it. Never hold your head down, and know that just because you are a student athlete, you're one of the best, you know. I mean, you don't have anything else to prove to anybody, you know. Just prove everything to yourself, and always have a goal for after, because sports is going to end at some point for you after. It's just a matter of, does your sports career end before or after the person that's starting ahead of you?
That's a good way to look at it. Thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like I've learned so much from you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for chatting with me today. It's been great to have you on Curious Blend.
Thanks. It's been fun being on it.
Well, thank you everyone who's been watching this and listening to this. I'm Keller Davis, and if you can go on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, give us a subscribe, leave us a rating. It makes a big difference for new people finding the show. And until next time, stay curious. Goodbye.